here, isn't it? So we did a workshop on Monday where we did risk drivers. I'm going to touch on that today. So if you were here, I'm going to build on that a little bit. One of the things that we've been doing in the last several years is we've been trying to get sort of traditional and agile methods blended together in the marketplace. We've done a ton of work with PMI, the Project Management Institute. You guys familiar with them? And we just launched the software extension to the PMBOK where we rewrote some of the rules of project management from the PMBOK to fit all the stuff that we do around Lean and Agile. It's all in that software extension. And one of the things that we talked a lot about is the social influence of risk management. So that section has been updated to add a lot of this collaborative stuff. I think it's kind of important as we look at this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of risk management. I'm going to touch briefly on mathematical analysis, but I think Troy's going to do a talk, and I think most of us are familiar about different ways to sort of do that mathematical analysis. What I'm going to spend a lot of time doing is how we integrate social influence into risk management, and then I'm going to touch a little bit on scaling. It's only like 40 minutes, so I'm not going to go deep into a lot of it. But if you have questions, I just said this be a discussion and not get through all my slides and have you guys get value out of it as jam through all my slides. You guys okay with that? All right. State of risk management. There's a bunch of work that's been out there, like done around the PMBOK and Prince2 and the INCOSI, however we say that now, groups have all been talking about sort of this risk management. A lot of it deals with getting risk registers, having risk categories, having conversations early on, and building big lists of risks. How many of y'all have big lists of risks on your project? Right? And then we score them. So what happens is that's useful in some regards, but what happens when you have 100 teams working on a giant project? Or you've got services teams on a different cadence and delivery teams, and everybody's on a different cadence. Do those risk registers help us drive risk down a lot? No, they don't, right? And so one of the things that we find is that the guidance in PMBOK and Prince2 has some good insight, but it's really only suitable for relatively small projects, right, without a ton of interconnections, and where we have a pretty clear insight into the future state of our project. So well-known domain, just a few. How many of y'all are building projects like that today where your outcome is really super clear and you have a small number of teams interacting together? So it may not be super useful, the stuff that's out there, right? Agile sort of has risk management built into it inherently. And you've heard people say that Agile is risk management. I think that's true. Again, when it's a small team, what Agile does a really good job of doing is creating context to have conversations around risk, and the groups are together, so the social stuff is all there. Agile doesn't give very good guidance on how to do that when you start to get into more complex projects with multiple teams and lots of things like that. So Agile has some gaps in addressing. There's some really good things that we can draw from Agile as well. This work recently, in the last few years, out of a Software Engineering Institute, they've been building something called Mosaic. And Mosaic, they started to talk about systemic risk management. So instead of tactical lists, understand what your environment would look like if you're moving in a good risk managed direction or a poor risk managed direction. And so they have a way of scoring and measuring and looking at all that I'll talk about a little bit today, that I think is pretty useful. But instead of saying, this could go wrong, 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 well, in Mosaic they'll go, if we're not managing our vendors well, and we have a lot of vendor management problems, this project is probably in trouble. If we don't get our features delivered frequently, this project is probably in trouble. I'll give you some categories for risk drivers. That's what we did in the workshop on Monday, is we worked through those risk drivers from Mosaic. But what that does is that creates context to have conversations around risk. The problem with what Mosaic's got is that it's still being driven by a project manager in the back room, and it's not really super strong quantitatively. So there's some value, I think, that we'd like to get from what PMI is doing, or even how we estimate stories and stuff like that is important around risks. You guys good with that? Is this interesting? Is everybody falling asleep? This is a great time to be talking on the third day. So here's the thing. How big is this problem of IT failure and risk management? Would you guys agree that an IT project failure is fundamentally a risk management failure? Right? Risks are the things that will cause our projects to fail. Right? So here's what's going on. I'm going to do the total cost of projects in the U.S. here. Direct cost or project cost, indirect cost, things that we lost. And then it turns out that we have about the gross domestic product, about 6.4% of it is in the IT industry. You guys good with that? All right. Then we have about 43% of that is software, of the IT industry, software that we're building. And it turns out that about 2/3 of the projects, according to the U.S. government fiscal year review, 2/3 of the projects that we do are at risk. And I bet that number is actually higher than that. 65% of those that are at risk will end up failing. 42.9% of all software projects. I don't know if that's exactly right, but do you think that's about right? You think about half the project looks like half projects fail. So what we're looking at here when you do the GDP is about $6 billion a year of money's wasted in the U.S. from failed IT projects. That's a lot of money, right? We could pay for healthcare for everybody. That was supposed to be funny. Anyway, so it's a big problem. So $25 billion per week is being wasted. So if we could save 5% of it through better risk management, we could generate a lot more money. We could get there right away. So it turns out the most important thing to do around risk management is to actually know what your risks are and pay attention to them. Right? That's what we got to do. So it's hard, though, because the tools that we've been given and most of the management thinking that we do software from, the same problems that we had around scope and all the things we've been addressing, all the management theory came from the industrial sort of revolution. A lot of the management theory is old, right? And we're solving different problems today. So we have to think about risk management differently. I'm not supposed to move. I'm supposed to stand on this square. So I'm going to try to do that. This is very hard for me. So one of the things that we do to try to understand this is mathematical analysis around risks. I did a question on Monday that we got wrong, and I realized afterwards why it was wrong. I have a project. I've got 10 different things I've got to deliver. There's no dependencies between them. They're 10 independent things, but they all have to get delivered in order for me to ship the product. You guys good with that? 10 different items. Each team's asked for an estimate. They tell us that each one will take 6 months to deliver because they're bringing me their average of 6 months. I know it's their average, and I know that sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Sometimes it takes a little bit less. So we're going to go in and do an extra 2 weeks on this project. I'm going to do a total of 8 months for the project. So what's the likelihood that this project has 10 independent components, sort of a normal curve above it? What's the likelihood that this project will be delivered in 8 months? Average is 6 months. You already know how often that project will fail from the previous talk. It'll fail half the time, right? So if I had those other 2 months?
Definition of failure, this implies the definition of failure is if it's late.
No, I have like, it could be value isn't delivered. It could be value isn't delivered. It could be that you deliver an unstable product that can't be sustained. It could be that you missed your date or overspent your money. There's a lot of different ways that projects can fail. So, and we would talk about risks in every one of those categories. I'm going to give you 5 in just a minute. But the point of this is not a precise definition of failure. The point of this is how poorly we understand risk and dependencies and why this is important to pay attention to. This question is about 10 things, on average take 6 months, 2 months give or take, gives us a 90% estimate. What is the likelihood this project will be delivered in the 8-month window? Can you guys do that math real quick? It's pretty simple. The answer is it's like almost 0, right? Because only one of these items has to be late for the project to be delayed. Does that make sense? So we got to be paying attention to it. So when we're doing this risk analysis, we go get our big risk registers and a big risk list. You guys have done this impact, probability, severity, and done the math on that. Have you guys done that? And then prioritize it. So I don't think this is awful. There's problems with it. Troy will explain some of the really bad problems with it to us. Are you going to talk about how we should be scoring our risks? So this is not a very good model, but at least we're having conversations around it, right? But this gives us the ability to look at some size of risks. We can math on it. We can start to do some things where we create probability curves against schedule or value or other things and start to come up with sort of 90 percentile sort of opportunities where we're going to hit. So based on risks, we can come up with different shapes. But there's a lot of different ways to do math around the risks that we come up with. Is that enough? I've only got like 40 minutes. I can't go into a lot of detail on some of this stuff. But this is a pretty nice way to do a risk burn down, different categories of risks. If you quantify them, you can kind of see where you are on your project. I'm going to show you a burn up and a burn down in just a second. But this is kind of the shape of the risk burn down. You guys good with that? That's how much risk is left in the project. It turns out that when we start to look at how we manage projects and we look at it, we spend a ton of time estimating the backlog, coming up with the size of the work, all that sort of stuff. But once we get above about 2 or 3 teams or any kind of components or any kind of ambiguity, this other stuff will have a much bigger impact on whether we deliver the project than the scope will. We put a ton of effort on our teams in estimating and managing the scope. Do you guys agree with that? We don't put much effort into explicitly managing the risks. You guys, this is horrible. I can't seem to stand in one place. It's actually disruptive to my thinking. So I believe that if this stuff has at least the same impact as that stuff, that somebody should be spending at least as much time on this as we're spending on the scope estimating and getting the scope clear. You guys good with that?
Are you saying managing it or planning it ahead of time?
Both. Yep. Yeah, I think you have to plan it ahead of time in order to manage it. Yeah, you can have the slides. So we've now covered everything that's in traditional risk management. We go and we do a register, we measure them, we report on them, we have a burn down, right? What are the problems with traditional risk management that make it not work? What sorts of problems have you guys seen?
Or Flaw of Averages, low times a low equals low, and low high equals medium. It's kind of the nonsense.
Yeah, that's right. And I think even when we do the math right, I think that number changes over the course of the project as we learn more. So I think one of the problems with the way we score it is that the numbers aren't really very helpful.
A lot of risk management current is causal. It's not causal, it's correlation. A lot of times, because once you start looking at it, this is evolving, the nature of the risk is changing. You are locked into what they identify.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't identify the unknown.
It doesn't identify the unknown, right? And we actually typically do this risk planning when we know the least about the project.
I guess, it's really traditional. You have this notion of risk items that are managed every week, and you track it and you log them and you mitigate or accept, and it's just the whole thing's flawed. So everything you do with it, learning and validating assumptions. It's just something to be managed.
Yeah, who's typically doing this type of risk management? Who is?
The guy who knows the least about the risk.
The project manager, somebody in the back room. All right. So there's some interesting things, sort of talk about social influence on the project. Projects are social, right? They're undertaken by people, for people, and we need increased collaboration. So we know if I have everybody in the room collaborating around our backlog, we're going to get better decisions. We're going to understand the problem domain better. Like, I don't have to sell y'all on collaboration, right? We know that's a lot better sort of stuff. When we're doing the risk management independent from the type of backlog planning, then we end up without effective collaboration. These are all the opposite. These are all the problems that come from not doing it socially. But one of the really interesting things that happens, and I jumped ahead. I moved 2 slides just a minute ago. So pretend like I didn't say that when I flipped to the slide, and then we'll get back to this. We have built into our collaboration. We have a lot of collaboration tools built into the Agile community, ways to get together and make decisions. We have sort of group decision making, fist to 5 stuff, planning poker to get relative sizes, retrospectives. These are all really good tools that we have in our toolkit that we use around the backlog and planning for our releases and our sprints. You guys good with that? So I think these are tools that we're going to start to incorporate into risk management. A lot of things with our backlog, we're going to start to do it around risk management. So we have a lot of these tools built in. But let me ask you a question real quick. So when we collaborate in, we get all these benefits. I want to show you this. Which one of these 2 projects, you guys familiar with sort of a feature burn-up? Concept of feature burn-up? Which one of these 2 projects is in better shape? The red line is the straight line, and the blue line is the... This is the ideal line. This is where we think we should be, like all the tools sort of do this, and this is what we've actually delivered. All right? So which project's in better shape? The top one or the bottom one? We don't have enough information, but this is what we do in organizations. We use sort of our burn-up to report status to people very frequently, right? And then what happens is, how many of y'all in organizations where your projects start green? Right? And it's when we know the least about the project and when it's riskiest, right? So now with a risk burn down, so if you look at that sort of risk burn down that I had earlier, which project's in better shape? The second one. So I have enough information to make a judgment about it. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that I care more about managing this one than I do that one in a lot of cases. Here's another really interesting thing. If you have projects that start green, What behavior does it drive in the organization? Do you guys get in trouble if your project goes red? So, which of these behaviors am I more likely to produce if I'm in an organization that uses velocity or some sort of earned value curve to determine my projects? Is it going to drive this behavior or this behavior? Yeah, so we're actually driving the risk back into the project when there's less time to deal with it. Isn't that kind of interesting? So the first thing that we want to do socially is we want to have the risk number be involved when we're talking about the project. We want to teach management. We want to have good tools for showing them about how big the risk is. So the reason the mathematical numbers and the things matter is we have to explain it in a way that management understands. What I've been starting to work on, and hopefully I'm going to learn more about how to do, I've been trying to actually give a schedule impact or a dollar impact or a value impact against the project as we built the number out, because management understands those types of things. When I say I have a 27, a risk that's a 27, management doesn't get excited about that. When I go, we're going to miss the frickin' market by 2 months and lose $500,000, management's interested in that. So as we can start to estimate these risks and turn them into information that we can report out to the business in terms of dollars or days or market misses, management will listen to it better. Okay? You guys good with that? So we still need to have like a backlog that we can estimate and a size that we can do math around, but we want to drive different behavior by using that risk information to communicate about the project and to drive behaviors within the project. That's the first sort of step. Is that helpful? Now here's my slide about keeping it green. Yeah. So this is my new rule. Every project starts red and has to earn its way green. Right?
And would you use a Gantt chart style here?
We've done a lot of different things. This was just an easy to access picture that had red, yellow, and green dots on it.
So you stole that.
Yeah. I don't dislike, like, if I'm doing release planning across, if these were releases across teams or sort of promises made to customers, I don't have any problem with presenting data in a Gantt chart sort of style.
So when you determine if it's under the burn down line, what is the risk?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. I've been doing it a couple different ways. Right now, there used to be this thing called RUP, which a lot of us don't like today. But one of the cool things that RUP tried to do is they said, to get out of Inception, you have to have a credible plan for dealing with all the risks. Got to have an architecturally proven thing and a way to manage it. And we think you want to be there pretty early in the project. So I think that's a pretty good way to get out of green. When I feel like you actually, what's that? Yeah, I mean, to be very specific, I haven't like written down really explicit rules. Right now, what I'm doing is when I feel like that group's actually making a promise they can keep, then we'll roll with it. I was doing some things where if I can prove my 90% estimate, I ran some Monte Carlo things that I liked. If I could get the promise within 90% due date, then I liked that. There's some other things that you can play with, but right now I've just been sort of making it up as we go along every time. The other thing that I'm doing, by the way, is if I get halfway through the project, like I don't agree with this burn down line anymore either for the risks. I think when I'm halfway through the project, I need to have substantially all the risk burned down, or I'm going to flip that project to red. So I would not have the final date on my ideal burn down for my risks be the same line as my burn up for my features, because it's just delaying risk too much. So I would shorten it 2/3 or half or something like that. And then you can do a ratio of those things. If risks are burning down slower than you're delivering value, the project's red. People will game that too. So this is a view of the Agile Cane. So you guys okay with this picture? There's like a vision. We do our big product backlog, probably do some sort of story mapping or release planning. There's our iteration backlog, working product. The team's operating off this backlog, delivering working tested code frequently. You guys good with that cadence? I can do this at scale. Like if I have many programs going on simultaneously, I might have product owner teams sort of doing the vision and prioritize product backlog, and delivery teams, multiple delivery teams, working this way and then probably integrating back up at the end. If it's a simple team, if it's a small team, it would be very simple. But in the big sort of more complex ones, there's probably more than one team driving this view. You guys good with that? Now, we've developed ceremonies in the industry now around how we handle all that sort of stuff. So, yes, I'm kind of cooking through the slides. That's good. We've developed ceremonies. What kinds of things do we do in the industry today when we're trying to get a vision communicated for a larger, more complex group? What sorts of things do you guys do? Do you guys do personas? Do you get, so product canvas, business model canvas? Anybody doing user journeys? Or product press releases? Sort of stuff to go tell the story about the product? To create a shared understanding? So I think when we're doing that, there's a couple things. One is I want to have some level of technical representation in the room and some understanding of my capacity when I'm building those things out to know what's really possible. But I also want to, during that time, at visioning time, I want to sit down and have discussions about the risks on the project too. So these risk drivers that we spent time Monday when we're envisioning, I'm going to spend time on these risk drivers. So these risk drivers, you take a number of scenarios or outcomes from the project. I'm going to give you a list of like 5 categories we can talk about. But I want that group to sit down and talk about, let's say our problem is we don't know if there's a market for this product. That's a risk that we've identified that we want to talk about. I want the group to talk about what the project would look like if we were moving towards the success state and what the project would look like if we were moving towards the failure state. So I'm going to explicitly articulate the success state and the failure state around that sort of thing. So if we had a product that didn't have a market, what would it look like halfway through? If we were going to fail, what would it look like halfway through if we were going to be successful? I want to talk about that. You guys good with that? I want to create a scenario that we can begin to plan around as we work on the product. Okay? Get a shared understanding of that. A couple of interesting things about this. It turns out that we're much better at identifying failure states than we are what it would look like if we're successful. Like to sit and talk about what it looks like so we can move the project in that direction is actually hard to do. People are really good at identifying disasters and don't have a clear understanding of where they'd like to go. I don't want this to be a project manager in the back room. I want it the same group of people that are learning about the personas and socializing the personas to having the risk driver conversation. It's another tool in the same sort of part of project planning. You guys good with that? You should have 5 or 7 of these in your backlog. You shouldn't have 10,000 of these. If you have 10,000 of these, we've had risk registers with 10,000 risks in it because you've got 100 teams working on stuff, right? So 10,000 risks, risk register of 10,000 risks is impossible to manage, right? Right? There's no risk management there, right? It's just overwhelming. These risk drivers, there's a lot of good data in Mosaic. I've got some stuff on our website, but Mosaic talks a lot about these risk drivers. And I like the literature that's out there. So that's a pretty effective tool. The categories that we've been using, Mosaic lists like 26 different categories of risk. I think it's too overwhelming. I've had a lot of success, which is having these 5 conversations. Do we know the scope? Is there a market? Can we deliver it for an appropriate cost? Will customers pay for it? Some of those sorts of things, and we can identify risk drivers. No, we don't know if there's a market for it yet, right? So what does it look like if we're halfway through if we have solved that problem? Well, we've identified 3 customers that will pay for it if we deliver it. We've done a proof of concept and validated it. So we start talking about an end state that makes it look successful. You guys good with this? So that would be like a business one. Technical, is it a new technology? Is it aligned with our architecture vision? Does it make a lot of sense for us to build this? Do we know how to ship it? Is it a platform that's going to exist for 3 to 5 years? Is it going to scale and be supported and supportable by our organization? Those are the types of things I'll be talking about from a technical standpoint. If it's new technology, you'll have some of these. If it's not new technology, I'm not really worried about it. But I want the group to be talking through that as you're defining these risk drivers. Okay? Feedback is an interesting one. I want to know when the things that are likely to cause my project to fail, I want to know that I have the ability to get feedback on it. So a lack of feedback risk, a lack of feedback is a risk on the project. I don't know when the features are done because my backlogs aren't synchronized. I don't know, we don't test until the end. I don't have the ability to get feedback from the market. Right? Those are all types of risks that will cause the project to be in jeopardy. Organizational is about having everything needed to deliver it. Do I have the people, the environments, the contracts, whatever that I have to have in place to deliver it? Right? So what does it look like what does a project look like if it's going to be in a failure mode? People continue to get yanked off every week to go work on bugs and special projects and defects. I'm planning with one assumption, but I'm never going to really have those people because they always get yanked off on special projects. You guys have that problem? When people get yanked around or multitasking, right? So we can identify what that looks like in a failure mode, what it looks like in a success mode. And then we'll talk about how to deal with these in a minute, okay? But I want to have the conversation on the different ones. And then dependency risks, things that are outside of our control that could cause the project to fail. What if we can't get it through compliance? What if we can't get the services group? What if our vendor doesn't deliver when they're supposed to? So having conversations with that whole group, somebody who's a little technical, somebody that's a little value, somebody that understands our capacity and the environment, and actually writing up these risk drivers is pretty important. Doing it as part of your visioning session is a super valuable thing to do. Hey, Russell. So does that make sense to y'all? Okay. Coming into our prioritized product backlog, we get everybody in the room or some subset of people in the room, and we start doing some sort of story mapping, right? We're going to be doing epics, features, and stories. We're planning our capacity. We're figuring stuff out. Is there a better time to really go understand the things that we need to be paying attention to in this backlog? We have the right people in the room to come up and really clarify the risks that we know about then, right? I also can use my risk drivers to drive this conversation. So there's a couple of things that we can do. This is a product manager. It's actually like part of a product owner team from a client. And what we've got now is we've got our risk drivers, or the purple stickies up at the top. So we've got epics and features and stories. We have risk drivers, and we have actual risk things that we want to do to manage the project. And we're going to sequence all that work together, some on the product owner team, some on the delivery teams, to actually have a risk plan for this release. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah, I'm going to put it all in one place. I mean, I probably tag it. In your tool, I would tag it, and I could do a risk burn down and a feature burn up. I could blend it all together to see what the impact on my teams are. But yeah, they consume capacity from the organization, right? It's work to be done. It doesn't deliver value. But if you remember, you guys seen Alistair's picture of the drive down risk and then do the value? What's that?
You start out pointing out the value of risk reduction.
Yes, so I think it enables the delivery value. I don't think our customers are paying us for driving down our risks. Driving out the risks, driving down our risks.
Yeah, you have to kind of show what the value of the information is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's all kinds of math we can do around it. My customer's paying me for delivering valuable features. Risks keep me from doing that. I think there's just some semantics around it.
Yeah, so what if you discover there really is no market? Just effort to the project.
I'd kill it.
Cancel the project, save them $10 million.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that we were noticing as we did this, we started out with risk items and stories. They're somewhat separate. And we still have that, but at one point we were noticing as we delivered these pieces, it kind of carried on from risk. So we were actually coupling them together and saying, hey, we're going to build this and do this.
Yeah, so in a lot of cases, many of these things will end up associated with features or epics. They'll become sort of acceptance criteria at some point. Some of them might become spikes or work that we do early, but it'll become integrated in with the work that I'm doing, the way that I look at the project. Yep. So this is a thing called the Doomsday Clock. Mike Griffiths and I, there's a paper you can go download, but this is taking the risk categories in release planning and getting the group to have a shared understanding of those risk drivers, and then going and saying, what is the stuff that's going to kill us on the project? And having the group kind of play their cards. In this case, the things that we thought were most devastating are towards the outside. The ones that are less devastating are towards the middle. If it gets crowded, it's just a way to facilitate a conversation, kind of gamifying, going and looking at the risks that will kill you. You guys good with this? It's a good way to generate some of that activity. This one's called the karma clock. I've got some different things. Yeah. What could pull us toward the failure mode of the risk driver? What can we do to avoid the failure mode? What trade-off options do we need to plan for based on failure modes? There's also, though, we can also play the karmic day. And these are stupid names, right? But yeah, these are good games. So they're the same risk drivers because I have a success state as well on it. Good with that? What would it take to move us towards the success state? Right? What options can we explore that might create better opportunities for us? Is it possible to do half of this product and get most of the value? Could we do that? What can we do if we're not going to get that contract signed? What do we need to have in place if that other thing is going to be delayed, right? So just walking around it. Yeah, I mean, I think that when we originally tried to do it, we tried to put the more impactful ones to the outside. I think it got really crowded, so I'm going to show you a different view of it in a second. So this one is now probability and impact, so either benefit or cost. I don't like this graduated scale. I'm trying to have a conversation around it. We're playing all the risks and trying to see which ones are really going to kill us. The ones out towards the edge are the more important ones to pay attention to. The ones towards the middle may or may not be.
What's the impact of your probability measure? So the ones in the high corners.
Yeah.
Because it can be high risk, but
So here's the thing about it. What I care about is that I've got the right people in the room having a conversation about it. I think that these numbers are all wrong and, in fact, often misleading. A small times a small might still cause your project to fail, right? So it's about having the end states, and I would want to revisit this frequently, right? So I'm not proposing that the fidelity of this model somehow makes it's about getting the people in the room having the conversations and driving in release planning, and then it's having the same view and those risk drivers again. So when we go to start to do our sprint planning, I'll get to this in a second. This is just taking it and doing a traditional sort of model and adding some math around it. And my point is that this doesn't solve your problem. But I think it's still useful. We also have the opportunity now to talk about opportunities as part of our risk management. So some people say opportunities are part of risk management. And some people say it's not. I'll tell you a very interesting thing when you do this, is teams are much better at finding opportunities to fix the project when you do that collaborative sort of view, which is interesting. So they're better at identifying failure modes, but they're really good at thinking about things that they can do to improve the likelihood for success on the project. And I like having those conversations early, not after the project has failed. That was supposed to be funny, too. You're a very dry crowd. So what am I going to do in sprint planning now, or iteration planning? So there's this sort of concept. This is at a release level, but I can be doing this for each sprint or for each release or even over time. As we start to lay out the backlog and groom the backlog and have our backlog horizon be 3 months out because we're doing release planning, I can start to identify the risks, the things that are likely to get my teams killed. I want to never put a piece of work in front of a delivery team that they're going to get blocked on from an unmanaged risk or dependency. Does it make sense? I don't want to start something that I can't deliver. So I want to start planning some of my capacity each time frame, each time box, to be mitigating risk for the stuff coming next. I want to be learning now for what I'm going to do pretty soon. You guys good with that? So I want to be burning my risks down throughout the project, but I don't want to put the risks in the same time frame that I'm putting the stories in. I want to be planning ahead so I can learn early. So this is just trying to show those risks right there are probably Q2 or Q3 type risks. It might be release 1, release 2, it might be sprint 1, sprint 2.
So you're trying to do some stuff to mitigate the risks that you want to manifest.
Because the features or the epics or the stuff I'm going to do in Q2,
Some certain risks you want to mitigate.
have some risks I want to mitigate, right? If I'm going to fail at the project because there's no market for it, I don't want to fail halfway through. I want to fail 1/5 of the way through. I want to fail very inexpensively, and I want to have my work sequenced so that I can fail inexpensively. Does that make sense? Is this useful? Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so just like a story is the card, the conversation, and the confirmation, we have specification behind stories or features. I've got my specification behind my risk. We'll write up why we thought it was important and what's going on there. Some will be more evident than others, right? For my thing, the context created by those risk drivers helps me have a richer conversation than an unfiltered backlog of tactical risks. So that a lot of times will allow me to be more clear on what I'm articulating there. It's going to move me in that direction. That's right. That's correct. We'll move us in the right direction. Hope is not a strategy.
So this makes sense when you know like what the team is going to work on for next 6 months or 12 months. But in today's world, like we are possibly trying to get away from doing the roadmap for like next 1 year, right? So the team would mostly learn about what we are going to work in the next 3 months. And so working on the risk that we might work 6 months from now, and we might not end up working on that product.
So 2 things. The first one is, even if I'm trying to commit only 3 months out, I probably want at some architectural planful level to be thinking about where I'm going to be 6 months out. We talked in the earlier talk. Dan talked about how not planning far ahead leads to architectural disasters. So I think even at the architectural level, you want to have those. So I can start having those conversations about markets and architecture and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I'll tell you, and I didn't put this picture in here, but one of the things we talk a lot about is most of the organizations that we're dealing with that have these giant risk management problems are not small teams delivering every 2 weeks, making it to go along, sort of emergent adaptive. They're planning at a 6-month to a year cycle. They're making promises to the market. They've got compliance and regulatory issues. They've got big dependencies, big rocks to move, and they can't just make it up every 2 weeks and do that. So I'm going to do risk management very differently when I'm up here in this sort of emergent, adaptive, dependency-free, short-term commitment sort of model than I am when I'm down here managing the work that I bet 90% of the people in this building are actually doing. Right? Now I bet half the people in San Francisco are working up here in this space, right? Because it's a cool town. So I wouldn't do some of this if I was up here. We'd do it a lot lighter. Right? But for most of the stuff that we're doing, we're down here.
You still do it a shorter time.
Yep.
Just not trying to guess 6 months. You're saying, what's the big risks, 2 experiments away that I want to
Yeah. Yep. So I can, this is really sort of lean startup thinking a little bit. Right? Validating the things that'll get you killed in the market, not starting things you can't deliver, learning quickly. Some of this is blended in here. I think Eric stole it from me. That's a joke. They laughed this time. So this is one way that we might be able to show the risk impact. You might be able to do a risk burn down, sort of do the spider diagram. I might want to show what it looks like time to time. I sort of fell in love with these spider diagrams about 2 years ago. But these are my 6 different risk drivers. I've got some weighting on it, and I can sort of show where they're going. Another way that you can present this is impact on schedule, or impact on cost, or impact on value. Right? Trying to turn it into things that are interesting. I thought these were clever when Mike and I put them in a couple years ago. Mike Griffiths and I put these in a couple years ago. I've learned that this isn't as interesting to an executive as your project's going to miss the due date. Right? So, when you start to scale this, you guys have, let's talk about SAFE, for example. And I'm not in any way a dogmatic SAFE guy. I think there's some good stuff built in there. But a lot of these ceremonies, we kind of know who's involved in them at different levels and how they scale. So you want to design your risk approach so you have the right people collaborating at each level as you're doing it. One of the challenges I see sometimes with the scaled stuff is that we don't have the technical people or an understanding of our actual capacity to deliver types of work involved in the early planning on those epics at the top level. So make sure you have the right people in the room and you're having the right risk conversations at each level. How much time do I have left? I sort of plowed through that. 1 minute? 2 minutes? So here's the challenges with it. It's hard to get started with this. You're gonna get resistance to it because you're gonna hear we're already doing risk management. This isn't adding any value. Creating the social environment, to have the conversation, to make planning risks be a fundamental part of how you're delivering your work is really important to get to. So you're going to have to struggle through it because it's different than what you've done in the past. The other problem you're going to have is people are going to fall over to tactical risk management, and you're going to put 10,000 line items, right? It's 10 or 12 categories of stuff that we sit down and talk about once every 2 weeks and continue to move the ball forward. Requires some training. You need to hire a really good consultant. Just kidding. And early iterations are poor. Ernest Hemingway's famous quote, "The first draft of anything is crap." When you go do this, it's not going to be great, but stick with it. It's interesting what the teams get good at early and which teams sort of get involved in this. So, was that helpful? I hit 40 minutes. That was pretty good, wasn't it? Well, the timing was good. Thank you.